Nestled among Utah's vast beauty, there lies a laboratory conducting some of the most important research into geothermal energy. But you won't see it with the naked eye, because this research is being conducted thousands of feet below the Earth's surface. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Heat Beneath Our Feet webinar, a webinar series that will accompany this year's WGA Chairman Initiative selected by Colorado Governor Jared Polis. This initiative will explore the development and deployment of geothermal energy. My name is Stephen Emmon, Policy Advisor for the Western Governors Association, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. I'd like to extend our gratitude to Governor Spencer Cox for inviting us out to Utah for a discussion of his state's geothermal resources. Throughout today's webinar, you'll get a glimpse into the conversations we had on topics such as environmental concerns, funding opportunities, and cross-industry partnerships. Utah is home to the Frontier Observatory for Research in Geothermal Energy, also known as Utah Forge. Utah Forge is a dedicated underground field lab sponsored by the Department of Energy for developing, testing, and accelerating breakthroughs in enhanced geothermal systems, also known as EGS. EGS systems allow for geothermal resources to be utilized without naturally occurring resources ideal for the process. This means the future deployment of geothermal systems will not be geographically restrained. EGS is seen by many as the future of geothermal electric generation in the United States, and we're fortunate to be joined by the Managing Principal Investigator, Dr. Joseph Moore of the University of Utah. While EGS opens many opportunities for the deployment of geothermal energy throughout the West, there are still a number of challenges that need to be considered. To discuss some of the environmental concerns and resource planning, we have joining us today Jaina Moan from the Nature Conservancy. And before going any further, I'd like to take a moment to recognize our sponsors who are listed at the beginning of this webinar. Their support is what's making our work on this initiative possible. A couple reminders for today's webinar. We will have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation. Please submit any questions you may have in the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. If you'd like to go back and listen to any of the presentations seen here today, we will be posting them to WGA's website and social media for viewing at a later time. With no further delay, I'll be handing the mic over to Dr. Joseph Moore to discuss his work on the Utah Forge project.
So thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to describe the work we're doing. We're excited about it, and I hope you will too. As Steve mentioned, just think about being able to generate electricity or direct uses anywhere in the world, in your parking lot in Mumbai, San Francisco, doesn't matter. Enhanced geothermal systems offer that opportunity. My slide is showing one of the wells and the area where enhanced geothermal system development is currently occurring. This is south central Utah. You see, it's a fairly desolate place. I'll describe that in a minute. But this is a field scale laboratory. In fact, it's the only one in the world where tools and technologies for de-risking enhanced geothermal systems can be tested. I'm the PI of the project, and we'll walk you through the work that we've been doing over the last several years. I did. All right. So the U.S. currently produces about 3,700 megawatts electric. And if we look at that and think about continuing to develop these natural systems, which are characterized by a heat source, fractures for water to circulate through them, and of course, water to extract the heat to carry it to the surface. Our options in the future are limited. DOE has set the goal of 60,000 megawatts of electric energy by 2050. And if you kind of use the 1 megawatt per 1,000 homes, you can see how much energy that really is. So to go from 3,700 megawatts to 60,000 megawatts in the next 30 years is going to be very difficult when we think about generating this electricity from hot spring systems. And that's really what these conventional systems are. In addition, in September, the Secretary of Energy announced Earthshot 4, which is to cut the cost of EGS by 90% to $45 per megawatt hour. We think it's doable, but we have a lot of work to do. On the map, I show temperatures suitable for electric generation, which are about 300 F, can be found across the country at depths between 2 and 4 miles, while lower temperature suitable for direct uses such as space heating, agriculture that we see in particularly in the western states can be found at shallower depths. However, in most places, the rocks at these depths between, say, 2 and 4 miles, when we can drill to these depths now, lack the permeability that is required for natural circulation of water and heat extraction. Jeff Tester and his colleagues at MIT, and this was 15 years ago, showed that extracting even 2% of this heat would provide more than 2,000 times the yearly energy needs. And so this is an incredible amount of inexhaustible energy that is available to us. But as you might expect, creating geothermal reservoirs where none exist naturally in low permeability hot rock is not a new idea. The earliest attempts to create geothermal reservoirs by hydraulically stimulating the rocks, by pumping water in, causing fractures to open, began in the 1970s in New Mexico. And this was called the Hot Dry Rock project at Los Alamos. Although a significant amount of progress and there have been many important lessons that have been learned, the results overall have been disappointing. You can see on this graph some 15 different projects that have been attempted throughout the world. None has produced what I would consider a commercial scale enhanced geothermal system. That means a system that is producing more than a few megawatts. Let's say commercial might be 5 to 10. We don't see that yet. And not only haven't we seen the level of productivity, several of these projects have experienced induced seismicity that has caused shutdowns and damage in some areas, particularly in Europe and South America. In Europe and Asia. For reference, I would consider an economic flow rate somewhere around 630 gallons per minute. Okay? Below that is not economic by conventional standards. So what is it going to take to build a geothermal system? What is needed? And I've listed what I think are the 5 keys to making EGS a reality. And first, it requires creating a fractured network for long-term heat extraction. And we're looking here about 15 years. I use 15 years because the value of hot water is not very high. And if you're making a profit of a cent and a half kilowatt hour, it's going to take 15 years before you pay off the well. And most power plants are amortized over 30 years. So we're looking at relatively long term without major declines, temperature declines within the reservoir. Not simple. Again, I'm looking at least 630 gallons per minute, but I'd really like to see twice that. A good well might be 1,500 to 2,000 gallons a minute. That's a lot of water when you start to think about it. Well, if you had an oil well producing that, we wouldn't be talking to you right now. We need tools to control fluid flow at high temperatures, and our temperature is greater than about 200 C or 400 degrees F. And of course, We need to be able to control the stress field so that we mitigate induced seismic events and also create the permeability. Tools is an issue. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But on the right-hand side of this, this image, you can see vertically a tool called a packer. This is a cork for all practical purposes. It goes in the well and fluid can't move past it. The one on the right, you can see, is missing most of its key elements, these elastomers here between the metal rings. This is a failed one. This is a new one. We've discovered that at temperatures above 400 degrees, these tools don't last. And so new tools are absolutely required to build an EGS system. Okay, so how in fact do we achieve these objectives of 60 megawatts, building the permeability we need? Well, first and foremost, we really need to have a field scale laboratory. We need to have a place where we can go to test the tools, to de-risk tools. Our project is not to generate electricity, it's to de-risk these tools and to create the reservoir underground. And this needs a full-scale laboratory, not a small laboratory in your laboratory or in a mine. We need to be able to inject and produce large amounts of water. And this can't be done on a smaller scale. And that's important. So this is not a trivial exercise, and it is certainly not a cheap exercise. And so you can see here some of our issues. One of the major problems we face is there is no incentive for industry to build tools, for example, right? There isn't enough work in EGS. We don't have any EGS systems that are working for companies to spend their time building tools and spending millions of dollars. So that becomes a critical effort. Utah Forge is currently funded at $220 million through mid-2024. That sounds like a tremendous amount of money. And it is a lot of money. But 50% of the funds are obligated for project management and operations. And these operations, well drilling, stimulation, wells cost between 5 and 15 million. I'll show you, we have 6 of them already. Drill stimulations are 5 to 10 million. These are very, very expensive activities. And then 50% of the funding is used for competitively bid R&D projects. And currently we're funding 17 of them at 50 million. So the money doesn't go as far as you might think. Additional funding, and an extension of the project is sorely needed for us to be able to demonstrate we can extract the heat, we can build a reservoir, we can de-risk the tools. And so we're in negotiation with DOE to extend the project to 2032. But we certainly need all the support we can get. And I can't be bashful about that. On the bottom, you see a tractor that the Colorado School of Mines is developing. This is one of these new tools that will work at 200 plus degrees C, 400 degrees F. And this particular tractor is being built to open and close sliding sleeves or flow control devices in the well. This is new, it's novel. Some things like this exist in oil and gas, but they won't stand the temperatures. So Colorado School is building this tool for the project. All right. As I mentioned, it takes many people, many skills to build an EGS facility. And the map shows some of our partners. You can see regulatory agencies here. You can see state surveys, national laboratories, private contractors, universities, and private companies that are all involved in providing support, financial support, and technical support to the project. On the right-hand side is the 17 R&D projects that we are currently funding. These are 3-year projects, as I mentioned. There'll be a total of about $50 million. Next summer, we will award another 17. So by the end of next summer, we'll have $100 million of research being conducted by about 35 outside entities. Well, let's talk about this forge itself. And so Utah Forge is really incredibly ideally located in Utah's renewable energy corridor. And this is in south central Utah. Closest town is the town of Milford. It's about 10 miles away, population of 1,500. And they like renewable projects. This is really a benefit to us. And within this corridor, and you can see it's only a few miles across. I don't have a scale here, but it's just a few miles. In fact, this is a mile, okay? Across this block, this is our Forge site. We have a geothermal system, the Blundell geothermal system owned by Pacificor, 36 megawatts, 1 megawatt per 1,000 homes. It's been running since 1984. We move to the west and we have the Forge site and the wells we've drilled. We move a little further to the west and we see the first of 168 windmills. They have a total generating capacity of 300 megawatts. They run 25% of the time. So you think maybe 75 megawatts is what they're actually producing. So about twice what the Blundell plant is producing, but these windmills extend for 7 miles beyond this. If we go further to the west, you see a 340 megawatt solar field. So we've got most of the renewables that you can see here, but you can't see them all. Between these windrows are pig farms, hog farms owned by Smithfield. And Smithfield is currently collecting pig gas. They're scrubbing the gas, and they run a pipeline across the Forge site into the Dominion natural gas pipeline. So we also have biogas facility here. And, that, what else could you ask for? There aren't any other renewables except maybe hydrogen, which is just up the road near Delta. That might be so that they're all here in one place. This is state land that we're on, so it's easy to work with. The Sitla managed land. We work closely with BLM here, and if we consider what's going on, there's no endangered species. There's no sage grouse here, prairie dogs. Makes it easy to work basically year round. We do respect hawks and other animals, fauna that are here, and we can work around them. You can see there's no human activity here, and there's no grazing, and there's no crop circles. And the reason that's the case is there's no potable water. So that the natural groundwater has relatively high concentrations of minerals that are toxic at high concentrations. And so the state does not allow the water to be used for grazing, for human consumption, for agriculture. And we, as Utah Forge, have leased that water. So good relationship with the town. They can't use it anyway. Okay, so since 2018 or 2017, we have drilled 6 wells, 6 field wells. The wells in white have been drilled, the wells in yellow, not yet. 58, 32, 56, 32, 68, 78, and 78B are vertical wells, and these wells are used for testing tools and for monitoring seismicity. Remember, I mentioned that the induced seismicity can be a problem. So we're monitoring that. We don't want anything to happen to the windmills of the geothermal field. And you can see these windmills in the background, the very, very large footprint. Okay, so these wells are monitoring. We've also drilled an injection well. An EGS requires at least 2 wells, an injection well and a production well. Water is injected into the injection well, and we create fractures between the injection and production well, and then it's pumped out of the production well. It's cooled and it's recirculated. So unlike, say, an oil and gas system where the water is removed and injected elsewhere, we circulate the water. And so it's constantly being recirculated into the ground and back into the reservoir. 16A is the first geothermal well that was drilled with a highly deviated tangent. Let me show you what that means. On the right, you can see the well itself goes down about 6,000 feet, makes a 65-degree bend, and then it extends about 4,000 feet along this dashed line, okay? And we will perforate and have already started to put holes in the casing along this 4,000 foot length, so that we can pump water into the rocks, and that water will heat up, and then we will produce it out of the production well. The production well will be 300 feet higher than the injection well. So the 2 wells will be very close. Objective is to prove that we can connect the wells. Later, we will drill another well to prove that we can extract heat over long periods of time. So just to summarize briefly, the U.S. has tremendous unrealized geothermal potential. You know, it is inexhaustible. It's enormous, right? But you can't meet U.S. objectives of 60,000 megawatts, or, you know, reducing the cost of EGS using conventional hot spring systems. They're just not big enough. We need to be able to drill everywhere across the country. And that is really significant. And we know that we drill deep enough, we can always find the heat we're looking for. You may not realize that Utah Forge is unique. It is publicly owned and operated laboratory. It is, of course, an essential stepping stone to commercial large-scale EGS development. It is being used to develop the roadmap so that developers and others in any country in the US can take the roadmap and build the system. Okay, that's what we're trying to do, make it simple to build. It also is important to realize worldwide, there is no other field scale EGS facility for research, none. A lot of countries are interested, Japan, Switzerland, England, China, Korea. These are countries, Italy, that are very, very interested in you know, seeing the value of EGS, but not one of these countries has a research facility. And so my pitch is we can't let this research facility die. At the end of 2024, I am required by the owners of the land to plug and abandon the wells and regrade. So unless we have continued support for this, it's going to disappear, and we will not have achieved objective of demonstrating the creation of an EGS. And even though we've only been funded for about 4 years now, 2017, 2018, we've had some huge successes. I'm really proud of what the team has done. The first is we've increased drilling rates by 50%. 50% of a project is drilling, 50% is power plant, typically. So,
Dr. Moore, if you don't mind, I would like to make sure that we save some time for Jaina, but
Absolutely.
We can go over some of those successes during our Q&A portion.
We can do that.
And we do have some questions already funneling in. If you guys have questions for Dr. Moore, please go to the Q&A box below. We are going to move on to Jaina's presentation of this part of this webinar. And so Dr. Moore, if you could unshare your screen really quickly, and I apologize, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
That's okay. I'm going to stop share. Did that work?
Nope.
No. I'm going to stop share. Yes?
No, not at this point in time. It should be that green button that's at the very bottom.
Yeah.
And once again, to the audience, if you guys wanted to see, oh, there you go, Dr. Moore. If you wanted to see Dr. Moore's presentation, we will have this up on our website after this, this presentation and webinar. We are going to move into Jaina's presentation with the Nature Conservancy. Dr. Moore had some great points. He talked about sage grouse, land use, as well as water during this presentation. I think those all transition to well what Jaina might be talking about here. So Jaina, I'll let you take the floor and talk about some land use impacts of geothermal energy.
Okay, thank you. I trust that you can all see my screen. Give me a thumbs up if that's the case. I see a nod. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Jaina Moan, and I am the External Affairs Director for the Nature Conservancy in the Nevada chapter of the Nature Conservancy. And I really appreciate the Western Governors Association for hosting this webinar and for inviting the Nature Conservancy to attend this forum and be at the table to talk a little bit about how we are thinking about environmental impacts and land use from geothermal energy. So I'm pleased to be here, and it's nice to meet you. First, a little bit about the Nature Conservancy. We're a global NGO organization, non-governmental organization, and the mission of the Nature Conservancy is to conserve the lands and waters on which all life depends. This is a very broad mission and a big one. As I mentioned, we are a global organization. We have chapters in all 50 states across the country in the United States, and then we have projects in about over 70 countries across the globe. And we focus on a wide range of issues. And with this work, we became involved with renewable energy because we're concerned about the impacts of climate change. That is one of the biggest threats to the things that we care about, which are nature and then also people. But we're really concerned about how nature is responding to some of these things. And we're very supportive of climate change and the efforts to reduce emissions. And geothermal offers a great promise and opportunity as clean energy source in our mix that we can use to help combat climate change. As we approach the renewable energy deployment, though, we also recognize that there are some significant impacts of renewable energy deployment from a cumulative perspective, looking at all technologies and all mixes. And we're concerned with making sure that that deployment and development is done in a way that has the least impact to nature and to the environment and to people. And so that is why the Nature Conservancy has started to get involved in renewable energy projects. And I'm pleased to be here to talk about it to you. I'm by no means an expert on any geothermal energy in specific. I feel like there's a lot of good knowledge on this call, but I think what I can do is bring a perspective that we bring when we look at environmental conflicts associated with that energy. And I think this slide really exemplifies, it's an example of a recent news item that I think has a big impact on the development and the thinking about development of renewable energy and geothermal energy in the West. And that is the recent listing of the Dixie Valley toad as endangered. And this was an effort that was started. It was first petitioned to be listed in 2017. There was a geothermal plant that has been proposed for the area around where this Dixie Valley toad lives, and that prompted the petition. And recently, it was found, the Fish and Wildlife Service did find that this species is in fact endangered. And so I think it really impacts the ability of that geothermal company to develop that plant. And they have already announced that they've reduced their size of that plant. And I think too, you know, this has been going on since 2017. So that's about 5 years of talking about this species, of thinking that this resource was going to be part of our electricity mix. And now it has a significant barrier to advancing forward. And I'll also just note too that the Dixie Valley toad was not the only conflict associated with this project. There was another another filant on that filing, and that was and that has been involved, and that's the Fallon Paiute Shoshone tribe. And so the development of this resource would have had significant impacts to a cultural resource as well. And so I think it is a good example of some of the environmental impacts that needed to be considered in the development of geothermal energy production. First and foremost, of course, I put on that list is the presence of sensitive, threatened, or endangered species habitat. And Dr. Moore pointed this out too. I really like Dr. Moore's slide where he points out the lack of conflict associated with the EGF site and the Forge site in Utah. And I think when where we can find those ideal locations to develop geothermal energy, they're like gold, and we have to think about how we can connect them up to that resource mix. But there's a whole host of other environmental impacts and land use impacts that could occur from the development of renewable energy. And many of these have been studied in literature and by our federal agencies. And again, they include sensitive, threatened, or endangered species habitat. There is the geothermal could affect the hydrology, both surface and groundwater flows, and this needs to be considered, especially in an arid and increasingly arid west from drought. It could impact the expressions of surface thermal features, so things like hot pots in the ground, mud pots, or geysers. I've been to geothermal sites where the geysers have disappeared completely after the plant has been built. And these surface thermal features are frequently also associated with, they're incredibly important spiritually for many of our tribes across the Western United States. That, again, it could affect the water quality, chemistry, and temperature of springs on the surface. And this, again, ties back to habitat for endangered species or threatened species or sensitive species. A lot of these species, especially in a state like Nevada, are pretty unique because they're found in these small, unique springs. And so you are going to have some unique exhibitions of endemism in some of these places, and it's important to consider how that habitat for those organisms would change with the geothermal plant going in place or proposed plant. There are impacts of cumulative infrastructure from transmission and renewable energy infrastructure that we're thinking about, and the Nature Conservancy is really trying to take a big step back with this effort and look at what with the mix of solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, transmission infrastructure, storage infrastructure, additional climate-related infrastructure that we might need in the future, direct air capture or carbon storage. What does all of that look like from a large cumulative impact? And how do those many sort of little impacts in the landscape add up to one big cumulative effect? And by looking at that from a larger perspective, can we then try to think of where this energy can be planned out in a better place to build or into a better system? There's also, from geothermal energy, I've read reports of land subsidence and increases in seismic activity. And then again, I've talked a little bit about the impacts to the cultural resources. And I think just another note on that is that the United States was once the traditional territory of a great diversity of Indigenous people across our country. And I think it's only respectful and probably well overdue to just loop them into the planning process from the beginning in a meaningful way. I know there's a lot of processes that seek for tribal consultation, but I think recognizing the importance of these places and these landscapes, even if it's not specifically on tribal land, if it's not specifically a reservation, it could have cultural or important significance. And it's important that that is considered as we think about where geothermal energy can go. And then a big one, I think, that faces the Western United States is the impact of geothermal energy on sage-grouse habitat. The populations of sage-grouse, the greater sage-grouse, are declining across the sagebrush sea, the big biome that is their habitat. This is due to a variety of things: drought, climate, development pressure, but a lot of that development pressure is for mining for critical minerals, or it's for geothermal energy. And so we need to be cognizant of this species decline. And I think it's important to understand where the plans are headed for preserving the species as we think about deployment of geothermal energy. So the big thing is that they're deterred by noise. Observations from the Nevada Department of Wildlife have indicated that sage grouse are absent from an area within 5 kilometers of geothermal sites like McGinnis Hills, for example. This could have cumulative impacts to the population. Oops, sorry about that. And it really, I think that presents itself with genetic connectivity. The more leks that you have abandoned, leks are the breeding areas for the sage grouse, the more that you could lose particular lineages where those birds can have that genetic connectivity. And it's just that additional effect upon the species populations and its decline. And so the BLM the Bureau of Land Management does have sage grouse conservation plans. They are currently following the rules under the 2015 plan amendment, but the BLM right now currently has scoping open for the 4th plan amendment. And so I put a website there for folks to look for, to find where those sage grouse plans are and what the progress is of that new plan amendment. So I mentioned earlier, how does the Nature Conservancy see its input into this? And I can tell you that we think about this from a perspective of smart from the start statewide energy planning. And I put statewide in there because I'm used to thinking about it from a Nevada angle, but I think you could easily put in smart from the start regional energy planning. And that's where you identify and prioritize lower impact areas where renewable energy generation, storage, and transmission can be deployed while minimizing the impact to those natural lands, cultural resources, recreation, and other conservation values. And we have done this by looking at mapping, a lot of mapping exercises where you overlay layers of sage grouse habitat or wildlife habitat or endangered species layers with plans for transmission and renewable energy and geothermal energy, or even like the opportunity for those things. One area that we're also looking at the Nature Conservancy is how to develop renewable energy on already disturbed or previously disturbed lands. And we call this effort our Mining the Sun program. And that's looking at where can we find these mine lands or brownfield or have potentially these previously disturbed lands where you can put renewable energy. There's high potential, low resource conflict. Oftentimes these sites have electrical infrastructure in place. And so you don't, and they're frequently located close to transmission. And so this is a slide that shows an example of 2 mapping exercises we did similar to this. Each dot on those 2 maps represents either a mine land or a brownfield site. Most of the data came from the EPA repowering program. But we've also looked at databases within Nevada itself to pull this together. The map on the left indicates solar and wind potential at each of those sites. So the bigger the solar, or the bigger the circle, the higher the wind energy potential, and the more red the circle, the higher the solar energy potential at those sites. The map on the left is that same map with geothermal favorability. And so the deeper purple the circle is at a site on this map, the more geothermal favorability it has at that particular site. And then on this map, you can also see that we included a transmission layer. That's what those lines are across the map on the state, just indicating where transmission is. So we've put this map together to really try to understand if there's opportunity for developing all kinds of renewable energy on mineland and brownfield sites, but it just is a representation or an example of how we can start to think about planning renewable energy in some of those lower impact places, but also those that might have good geothermal favorability. Finally, I have one more slide, and that is to just share with you a list of tools and resources that could be useful for you, that were useful for me, and in coming across or like preparing for this presentation and thinking about it. But of course, the Bureau of Land Management has a good guidance and resources page, geothermal guidance page. The Western Association of Fish and Wildlife agencies has a crucial habitat mapping tool that you can use and download some layers from there for some critical habitat, different species across the West. This USGS survey has a conservation design tool that looks at ways to proactively restore the sagebrush biome. And then finally, the Nature Conservancy, the organization I represent, recently this fall published a study called Power of Place West, which looked at build out of renewable energy across 11 Western states to meet the climate goals for those Western states, and looked at pathways by which this could be done in a way that's friendly for people and nature. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer additional.
Jaina, thank you very much for your presentation. One thing I will say throughout this entire initiative, mapping has been a huge thing that has been brought to our attention, not just mapping geothermal resources, but I appreciate what your team has done with mapping over possible transmission lines, but also I think there needs to be a discussion maybe of mapping habitats for endangered species. So we make sure to find those golden nuggets, like you said, where it's ideal to deploy these geothermal resources. With that being said, we do have quite a few questions. We'll try to get through as many as possible. And the first one comes from Suzanne. And this one is for Dr. Moore, it sounds like. It says, what do we know, if anything, about the number of jobs required, both for one, the construction of EGS infrastructure, and two, operations and maintenance for EGS facilities?
The simple answer is EGS will be no different than conventional geothermal systems in terms of plant development, drilling, and operations long term. I don't have those numbers. Obviously, it depends on the size of the plant and the size of the infrastructure that is required. But I think it will be very similar to that.
Awesome. We do have a question from Gary. He says, is Quay's millimeter wave technology going to be tested? I believe Quay's is a company, if I'm not mistaken, in the context of this. Are you familiar with this technology, Dr. Moore?
No, and at this point, we don't have plans. It's testing of new techniques usually comes through solicitations. We just issued a solicitation for research to be conducted. We do encourage folks that have new technologies to reach out to us. Two of the wells that we would drill, one is already drilled, one will be drilled in the future, are specifically for testing new technologies. So if there is a new technology and you think it'll work better than the existing ones, we're very much interested in talking to you.
Well, and Dr. Moore, that was one of our other questions we received. If you're a private company that wanted to work with Utah Forge, how might they reach out to you?
You can reach me through the website or Utah Forge solicitations, Utah Forge research, or I think you have my email, jmoore@egi.utah.edu.
Awesome. And one question is very technical. Now I hope I'm saying this right. I'm not an engineer, but Thomas asked, how will the second production well be oriented relative to the injector?
The production well, so we have an injection well at this point. It is drilled to the southeast to take advantage of the existing regional stress field. The production well will be drilled 300 feet above and parallel to the injection well.
Understood. Wonderful. We have a question from Joseph. He says, Dr. Moore, can you briefly describe the fracking technique or the stimulation technique used for the injection well?
Sure. Unlike previous geothermal projects and programs, we recognize that cased wells are necessary to control fluid flow. So what we've done is, in fact, we've drilled the first highly deviated and the first cased well specifically for geothermal communities, geothermal development. The cased well, we use a series of plugs and packers, corks, and perforate the casing between the packer and the plug. So if you can bear with me, we would run a cork or a plug into the well, set it in the casing. We would then perforate the casing through the cement and to the rock behind the well or behind the cement. We would then run a packer. I showed you a picture of a packer, and put a tube in it and then pump water through the tube into this isolated zone between the packer and the plug. And using the water pressure, we would attempt to open up the fractures that exist in that zone or create new fractures. When we drill the wells, we take great pains to both monitor the rock types and to obtain image logs. We can talk about image logs later, but basically the image log tells us where the fractures are that the well has intersected. And then we specifically target those fractures because we know that those fractures will open the easiest and under the lowest pressure. So it's the process we use to open fractures, pump water in, and those fractures will grow and extend toward the second well. During these stimulations, we monitor seismicity very, very closely. These are non-sensible seismic events that we have seen in the stimulation we've done. So you can stand there and you'd never feel it. But those events tell us how far the fractures have grown vertically and horizontally. And that will help tell us how far the production and injection wells need to be from each other.
I think that's great information to have. Thank you for sharing that. We have a question from Ken, and I think this is a great one from Jaina and Dr. Moore. Is there adequate water in the West to support geothermal development? I'll let Jaina go first on this one.
Thank you for the question. I think the short answer is it depends on where you look, and it depends on what geothermal technology is being used. And, particularly, like, for example, in the case where with the Utah Forge site, that's not potable water that's going to be used in that operation or by anybody. So it turned out to be a good site. But I think it is a very valid question and really important for pointing to the need for additional planning. I think, there's water sources that could become available in the West as, coal-fired power plants close, for example, or those sources might be converted. I've heard things like that, but I do think that water availability is a key question that needs to be asked and answered, and before a geothermal operation goes into, moves beyond the planning stage. So thanks for the question.
Absolutely. And Dr. Moore, is there enough water?
Oh, well, let me expand on that a little bit. That was, I agree with where you're going in your comments, Jaina. So if we're going to build a geothermal system, a conventional geothermal system, obviously there must be enough water to use and be economic. So that water is extracted and re-injected. And, a tremendous amount of reservoir engineering and thought goes into developing a geothermal system that is conventional, has the permeability, okay? That's one part of the water equation. Obviously, for EGS, we will have to work in areas where there is adequate water, and we will have to look at how much water can we use, what is consumable, and what goes back in the ground. Because remember, this is a circulating system, and we are putting the water back into the ground. And that's very different. I don't want to get on my high horse, but when you start to think about fracking from an oil and gas point of view, the water that comes out of that reservoir is taken somewhere else. It's not injected at the site of production. But that's one use of water is just generating the electricity of the direct use, which is put back. The second use of the water is for cooling. So if we have a turbine, the water or steam or an organic fluid, it's called a binary plant, organic Rankine cycle, which use an organic fluid. That organic fluid or the steam, and almost all geothermal systems today in the US are organic Rankine cycle, binary systems, closed loops. The organic fluid goes through the turbine and it's condensed on the back side of the turbine. That's what causes the turbine to turn, right? You're condensing this R134 or organic fluid on the backside of the turbine. You're creating a vacuum and you're effectively sucking organic fluid through, the vaporized organic fluid through the turbine. And so it is the condensation of that organic fluid back into a liquid, the organic vapor back into a liquid through a closed loop that requires some sort of cooling mechanism. So when you see a coal-fired plant or a nuclear plant, you see these big steam stacks. What that is condensing the steam that is coming through the turbine, right? That's all geothermal systems and energy system, electric generating systems work the same way. So the question then becomes, is there enough water to use water cooling to condense that organic vapor? And in most cases, the answer is no. And so what companies have done, and if you wander around and look at some of these plants around the West, you'll find that they're using fans, air-cooled fans, to condense that organic vapor back into a liquid. So they're not using water. They're not taking anybody's water for that condensation process, and they're using some of the electricity they generate to run the pumps. So the answer is, yeah, if I have enough water, I'd prefer to cool with water. But if I don't have enough water, we're going to cool with air.
And my assumption is too, is as Utah Forge continues your research, you guys are going to be more efficient in your water usage, and it's only going to increase from here.
And I'm right now, at the temperatures we're looking at, I'm not up in the high 500s. We're going to be close to these 400s. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be cooling with air. This will be a binary system cooling with air.
That's good information to know. Thanks for sharing that. And I apologize. I do need to be considerate of everybody's time. So I am going to cut off the Q&A section right there. If you would like to continue with the Heat Beneath Our Feet initiative, we do have a survey online that you can fill out. Look up WGA Heat Beneath Our Feet survey. You'll be able to fill that out and give us your answers to some of the questions most pressing to geothermal resources in the West. I'd like to once again thank our webinar participants for joining us today, as well as thanking Governor Spencer Cox for inviting us out to Utah to continue our work on the Heat Beneath Our Feet initiative. If you're interested in hearing more about geothermal energy, make sure to catch the most recent episode of the Out West podcast, where we discuss the repurposing of oil and gas wells for geothermal. I look forward to seeing all of you here next time on the Heat Beneath Our Feet webinar, when we discuss additional applications of these geothermal resources. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity.